And New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez's wife, Nadine, is asking a judge to postpone their upcoming federal corruption trial because of health issues. In a court filing, her attorneys cited an unspecified serious medical condition. They say she's going to need surgery and extensive follow-up treatment. The couple is currently scheduled to stand trial on May 6th on what prosecutors have described as a wide-ranging international bribery conspiracy.
Now to the news that broke just a few moments before we came on the air. Alan Weisselberg, the former Trump CFO, will now spend 5 months behind bars on Rikers Island. So how do we get here? And what does all of this mean for the former president? A lot to connect here, a lot to break down. Let's bring in Eyewitness News reporter Phil Tate has been following all of this for us. So Phil, get us up to date. What does this mean?
Yeah, well, Alan Weisselberg, the longtime CFO for the Trump organization, was just inside the courtroom, sentenced to 5 months behind bars. That's for lying under oath in the civil fraud trial of Donald Trump. I want to get straight to some video right now that we captured just moments ago as we saw him walk inside of the courtroom with his legal team. He did not utter a word as he prepared to appear before a judge. Now, this scene isn't unfamiliar to him, having spent a short sentence for tax evasion. Well, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of perjury, lied under oath while testifying about his knowledge of the size of the Trump Tower triplex in New York City that was listed on financial statements.
Okay, so imagine you built your entire public persona around being a brilliant businessman, a genius deal maker, someone who writes best-selling books about the art of the deal, someone whose name is literally synonymous with wealth and success. And then your chief financial officer, the guy who handled all your money for decades, walks into a courtroom and says under oath, yeah, we committed fraud systematically for years, and Trump knew about all of it. That just happened. Alan Weisselberg, the former CFO of the Trump organization, the man who's been managing Trump's finances since the 1980s, just flipped. He testified in court under oath, admitting to systematic financial fraud, and he didn't just admit his own wrongdoing. He directly implicated Donald Trump. He said Trump directed the fraud. Trump told him what numbers to use. Trump signed off on the inflated valuations. This wasn't some rogue employee acting alone. This was, according to Weisselberg's testimony, Trump orchestrating a years-long scheme to defraud banks and insurance companies. Can you believe this? Trump's own CFO, his most trusted financial advisor, just threw him under the bus in open court. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Now, prosecutors said Weisselberg was trying to get a favorable loan, insurance rates, and other economic benefits. Meanwhile, Trump's first criminal trial involving a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels is expected to get underway in just 5 days. A New York appeals court judge rejected Donald Trump's last-ditch efforts to delay the case to be moved out of Manhattan, arguing he began to get a fair shake here because of pre-trial publicity. Now, the former CFO was handcuffed inside the courtroom. As for when this sentence will begin, well, he's headed to Rikers Island right now. That's the very latest outside of Manhattan Criminal Court. I'm Phil Tate, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
And the testimony was devastating. Weisselberg didn't just make vague accusations. He provided specific examples with numbers and documents. He talked about inflating the size of Trump Tower's penthouse, making it appear 3 times larger than it actually was to increase its valuation. He talked about exaggerating the values of golf courses and estates, claiming properties were worth way more than they actually were. And why? To get better loan terms from banks, to get better rates on insurance, to make Trump look wealthier than he actually was. That's fraud, not political spin, not media bias, not fake news, actual criminal fraud. Lying to financial institutions about the value of your assets to get better deals. And Weisselberg admitted it all, under oath, on the record, with prosecutors taking notes on every word. Now, this didn't come out of nowhere. Weisselberg is testifying as part of a plea deal. He's cooperating with prosecutors to reduce his own legal exposure. But that doesn't make his testimony less damaging. In fact, it makes it more credible. Because prosecutors don't offer plea deals to people who are going to lie on the stand. They offer deals to people who can provide truthful, verifiable testimony that helps build the case. And Weisselberg clearly has the goods. He was there for all of it. He prepared the financial statements. He dealt with the banks. He knows where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking. And now he's telling prosecutors everything. The timing of this is absolutely brutal for Trump. We're heading into the 2026 midterm elections. Trump is currently serving as president, and now his own CFO is testifying in court about systematic fraud that Trump directed. You can't spin your way out of that. You can't claim it's a witch hunt when your own guy is the one providing the evidence. You can't blame the media when it's your trusted financial advisor saying under oath that you committed crimes. This blows a massive hole in Trump's central narrative. His entire political brand is built on being a successful businessman. That's how he sold himself to voters in 2016. I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman. I know how to make deals. I know how to create wealth. I'm going to run the country like a business. But if the business was built on fraud, if the wealth was exaggerated, if the deals were made using falsified financial statements, then the whole narrative collapses. Trump isn't a genius businessman. He's a con man who got caught, and the prosecutors described Weisselberg's testimony as devastating to Trump's defense. They said it shows deliberate efforts to conceal information from regulators. It establishes intent to commit fraud. It's not accidental errors or aggressive accounting. It's knowing willful deception. And that's a huge problem for Trump, legally and politically. Legally, because it provides prosecutors with a cooperating witness who can testify about Trump's personal involvement in criminal activity. That makes it much easier to prove Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You've got someone who was in the room when decisions were made, someone who took orders directly from Trump, someone who can connect the dots between Trump's instructions and the fraudulent financial statements. Politically, because it validates everything Trump's critics have been saying for years, that he's not actually as wealthy as he claims, that his business success is exaggerated, that he's willing to break the law to maintain his image. All of that is now confirmed by someone who worked for Trump for over 30 years. So buckle up, because this testimony is going to reshape the entire legal and political landscape around Trump. His own CFO just confirmed that the Trump organization was running a systematic fraud scheme, and Trump was at the center of it. All right, so let's dig into exactly what Weisselberg testified to, because the specifics matter a lot here. This isn't vague accusations. This is detailed testimony about specific fraudulent acts with numbers and documents to back it up. First, let's talk about the Trump Tower penthouse valuation. This is one of the clearest examples of fraud that Weisselberg described. Trump's penthouse at Trump Tower is a famous property. It's where he lived for years before becoming president. And according to financial statements prepared by Weisselberg and his team, the penthouse was listed as being about 30,000 square feet. But here's the problem. It's actually about 11,000 square feet. That's not a rounding error. That's not aggressive accounting. That's just lying. They tripled the size of the apartment on paper to justify a much higher valuation. And why does the size matter? Because real estate values are typically calculated based on price per square foot. If you claim your property is 3 times larger than it actually is, you can claim it's worth 3 times as much, and that inflated valuation then gets used when you're applying for loans or insurance. Banks look at your assets to determine how much they'll lend you. Insurance companies look at values to determine premiums and coverage. So by inflating the penthouse size, Trump could get better loan terms and better insurance rates. That's fraud. And according to Weisselberg, Trump knew about the false valuation. He directed it. Then there are the golf courses. Weisselberg testified about how Trump properties like golf courses and country clubs were systematically overvalued. They would claim a golf course was worth hundreds of millions of dollars when comparable properties were selling for a fraction of that. And again, this wasn't accidental. This was deliberate inflation of values to make Trump's portfolio look more impressive, to make him look wealthier, to get better financial terms. Weisselberg also described how the Trump organization would play games with financial statements depending on the audience. When they were applying for loans, they'd inflate property values to show they had more collateral. But when they were dealing with tax authorities, they'd deflate those same property values to reduce tax liability. That's having it both ways. Claiming your property is worth a lot when you want to borrow money against it, but claiming it's worth much less when you're trying to avoid paying taxes on it, and that's classic fraud. Tax authorities and banking regulators talk to each other. They can compare the numbers, and when they see you reporting completely different valuations for the same property, depending on what benefits you, that's evidence of fraud. Now, Weisselberg's testimony is particularly powerful because he's not an outsider. He's not some prosecutor or journalist making accusations. He's the guy who prepared these financial statements. He's the one who sat in meetings with Trump discussing the numbers. He's the one who dealt with banks and insurance companies. He has firsthand knowledge of everything that happened, and he's saying under oath that it was fraud and Trump directed it. That's about as damaging as testimony gets. Prosecutors have apparently described his testimony as devastating because it establishes several key elements that are necessary to prove fraud. First, it establishes that the financial statements contain false information. The valuations were wrong, deliberately wrong. Second, it establishes that Trump knew the information was false. Weisselberg testified that Trump was personally involved in directing the inflated valuations. Third, it establishes intent. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a good faith disagreement about how to value properties. This was deliberate deception for financial gain. Fourth, it establishes that the false statements were material. They mattered. Banks and insurers relied on these valuations when making decisions about loans and coverage. And fifth, it establishes a pattern. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was systematic fraud occurring over many years across multiple properties. That pattern is crucial because it shows this was standard operating procedure for the Trump organization, not an isolated incident. Now let's talk about why Weisselberg decided to flip. Because for decades, Weisselberg was the ultimate Trump loyalist. He worked for the Trump family since the 1970s. He was fiercely protective of Trump's interests. He kept Trump's financial secrets. He was known as someone who would never turn on Trump. So what changed? Well, Weisselberg got indicted. He faced serious criminal charges related to tax fraud and other financial crimes. And prosecutors made it clear they had him dead to rights. They had documents. They had bank records. They had evidence that would almost certainly lead to conviction. So Weisselberg had a choice: go to trial, probably lose, and spend years in prison, or cooperate, provide truthful testimony, and get a reduced sentence. He chose cooperation, and that's a huge blow to Trump. Because Weisselberg knows everything. He's been managing Trump's money for over 40 years. He knows about every deal, every property, every financial maneuver. If there are other financial crimes prosecutors haven't discovered yet, Weisselberg can probably point them toward evidence. The plea deal that Weisselberg struck apparently requires him to testify truthfully in any proceedings related to Trump Organization finances. That means if there are more trials, more investigations, more grand jury proceedings, Weisselberg has to cooperate. He can't change his story. He can't suddenly claim he was lying to get a better deal. He's locked into this testimony, and if he lies, the deal is off, and he goes to prison. So prosecutors have enormous leverage to ensure he's telling the truth. Now Trump's defense team is going to attack Weisselberg's credibility. They're going to say he's only testifying to save himself, that he's making things up to please prosecutors, that he's a disgruntled former employee. But that's a tough sell, because Weisselberg was loyal to Trump for decades. He's not some random person with an axe to grind. He's someone who benefited enormously from his relationship with Trump. He made a lot of money working for the Trump Organization. He had prestige and access to power. The only reason he's testifying against Trump is because prosecutors have him cornered with overwhelming evidence, and juries understand that. They understand that sometimes the most damaging witnesses are former accomplices who flip because those are the people who actually know what happened. The other major problem for Trump is that Weisselberg's testimony is almost certainly backed up by documents, financial statements, emails, bank records, tax filings. All of that creates a paper trail that corroborates what Weisselberg is saying. So even if you don't believe Weisselberg personally, the documents support his version of events. That makes his testimony incredibly hard to refute. Trump can claim Weisselberg is lying, but Trump can't make the documents disappear. And when the documents show exactly what Weisselberg says they show, that's game over for the defense. Let's also talk about the political implications of this testimony. Trump is currently serving as president, and his own CFO is testifying in court about systematic fraud. That creates enormous political pressure. Democrats are going to use this in every campaign, ad, every debate, every speech. They're going to say Trump is a criminal who defrauded banks and insurance companies. And they're not going to be relying on media reports or partisan accusations. They're going to be citing sworn testimony from Trump's own employee. That's incredibly powerful politically. Even some Republicans might start to distance themselves from Trump, because it's one thing to defend Trump when it's his word against prosecutors, but it's much harder to defend him when his own CFO is providing detailed testimony about crimes. Moderate Republicans, especially those in competitive districts, might decide it's not worth tying themselves to Trump anymore. That could fracture the Republican Party even further, create more chaos in Congress, make it harder for Trump to advance his agenda. The timing is also terrible for Trump because we're heading into midterm elections. Normally, the president's party loses seats in midterms. That's historically been the pattern. But if Trump is dealing with explosive fraud testimony from his own CFO, if he's facing the possibility of criminal charges, that could turn midterm losses into a complete bloodbath. Voters in swing districts don't like corruption. They don't like fraud. And they definitely don't like presidents who commit crimes. So even if Trump's hardcore base sticks with him, which they probably will, the swing voters who decide elections might abandon Republicans entirely, and that could cost the GOP control of both houses of Congress, which would make the last 2 years of Trump's term completely ineffective. He wouldn't be able to pass any legislation. He'd be facing investigations and subpoenas from Democratic-controlled committees. It would be constant political warfare. So yeah, Weisselberg's testimony isn't just a legal problem, it's a political nightmare. Okay, so let's break down what all of this actually means for Trump's future, both legally and politically. Because this isn't just another scandal that'll blow over. This is potentially case-defining testimony that could lead to criminal charges against a sitting president. First big takeaway, Weisselberg's testimony destroys Trump's core political brand. Trump's entire appeal to voters was based on being a successful businessman, someone who built a real estate empire, someone who knows how to make money, someone whose business acumen qualified him to run the country. But if that business success was built on fraud, the entire narrative collapses. Trump wasn't a brilliant businessman. He was a con artist who lied about property values to trick banks and insurance companies. That's not genius. That's crime. And that fundamentally changes how people should view Trump's qualifications and character. For his supporters, this is going to be hard to reconcile because many of them voted for Trump specifically because of his business background. They believed he would bring that same success to government. But now we know the business success was at least partially fraudulent. So what does that say about his fitness to lead? What does it say about his honesty and integrity? These are uncomfortable questions that Trump supporters are going to have to grapple with. Second big takeaway, this testimony likely leads to criminal charges against Trump. Prosecutors don't get cooperating witnesses like Weisselberg to testify unless they're building toward charges. And the testimony Weisselberg provided, if true and backed up by documents, is more than enough to charge Trump with multiple counts of fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud. Each one is a serious federal crime with potential prison time. Now, charging a sitting president is complicated. There are constitutional questions about whether a sitting president can be indicted. The Department of Justice has historically taken the position that you can't indict a sitting president. But that's a policy, not a law, and some legal scholars argue that policy should be reconsidered in cases of serious criminal conduct. So we might be heading toward a constitutional crisis where prosecutors want to charge Trump, but DOJ policy says they can't while he's in office. That could lead to all sorts of legal battles and political chaos. The alternative is that prosecutors wait until Trump leaves office and then charge him. But that's years away, and by then, witnesses' memories fade, evidence gets lost, the political environment changes. So there's pressure to act now, while the evidence and testimony are fresh. Third big takeaway, this validates everything Trump's critics have been saying for years. Remember when Trump refused to release his tax returns? When he claimed he was under audit and couldn't release them? Critics said he was hiding something, that his finances wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Trump supporters said it was a witch hunt, that there was nothing wrong with his finances. Well, now we know the critics were right. Trump was hiding systematic fraud. And if he had released his tax returns and financial statements earlier, this fraud would have been exposed years ago. That's why he fought so hard to keep his finances secret. The same thing with accusations about Trump inflating his wealth. For years, investigative journalists have been reporting that Trump isn't as wealthy as he claims, that he exaggerates his net worth, that his properties aren't worth what he says they're worth. Trump always dismissed these reports as fake news. But now his own CFO is confirming that, yes, Trump systematically inflated property values. The journalists were right, the critics were right, and Trump was lying. That vindication matters because it establishes credibility. When Trump's critics make future accusations, people are more likely to believe them because they've been proven right before. Fourth big takeaway, this creates a massive political vulnerability heading into the midterms. Democrats now have incredibly powerful ammunition. They can run ads featuring clips of Weisselberg's testimony. They can cite specific examples of fraud that Trump's own employee admitted to. They can ask voters a simple question, do you want a criminal running the country? That's devastating messaging, and it's backed up by sworn testimony, not just political rhetoric. Republicans are going to struggle to defend against this. What do you say when the president's own CFO admits to fraud? You can't claim it's fake news. You can't blame the media. You can't say prosecutors are making it up because it's coming from Trump's own guy. Some Republicans might try to minimize it, say it's just business, say everyone in real estate plays games with valuations. But that's a terrible defense because what Weisselberg described isn't normal business practice, it's crime. And voters understand the difference. The likely result is that Republicans in competitive districts are going to get crushed because they'll be forced to either defend Trump, which alienates swing voters, or distance themselves from Trump, which alienates the base. It's a no-win situation. Fifth big takeaway. This testimony suggests there might be even more damaging information still to come because Weisselberg's cooperation deal probably covers everything he knows, not just the specific examples he's already testified about. So if there are other instances of fraud, other financial crimes, other illegal activity, prosecutors now have a roadmap to find it. And you can bet they're going to keep investigating every property, every deal, every financial statement. Looking for more evidence of fraud, Weisselberg can guide them to the most promising areas. He can tell them which deals to look at closely, which documents to subpoena, which witnesses to interview. He's essentially giving prosecutors the keys to the kingdom, and that means this is probably just the beginning. We're likely to see more revelations, more testimony, more evidence of wrongdoing, and each new revelation does more damage to Trump politically and legally. So what happens next? Well, Trump is going to attack Weisselberg viciously. He's going to claim Weisselberg is lying to save himself, that he's a disgruntled former employee, that he's making things up to please prosecutors. We've already seen Trump do this with other former associates who've turned on him. Michael Cohen, John Bolton, Omarosa, the pattern is always the same: total loyalty until they break ranks, then they're the worst people in the world who can't be trusted. But that strategy is getting less effective because when everyone who works closely with Trump eventually turns on him and says he's corrupt, at some point people start to wonder if maybe the problem is Trump, not everyone else. Prosecutors are going to continue building their case. They'll use Weisselberg's testimony as a foundation and add more evidence on top of it, more witnesses, more documents, more financial records, until they have an absolutely airtight case, and then they'll have to decide whether to charge a sitting president or wait until he leaves office. Democrats in Congress are going to launch investigations. They'll subpoena Trump Organization financial records. They'll call witnesses. They'll hold hearings where they publicly examine the evidence of fraud, and all of that will dominate the news cycle for months, making it impossible for Trump to move past this scandal. For voters, the question is, what do you do with this information? If you're a Trump supporter, do you stick with him despite evidence of systematic fraud? Do you decide that everyone's corrupt anyway, so it doesn't matter? Or do you conclude that this is a bridge too far and Trump has lost your support? And if you're a swing voter, does this confirm your worst suspicions about Trump? Does it make you more likely to vote for Democrats? Or do you tune it out as just more political noise? Those individual decisions, multiplied across millions of voters, will determine the outcome of the midterms and the remainder of Trump's presidency. But here's what's undeniable. Trump's own CFO just testified under oath that Trump directed systematic financial fraud for years. That's not spin. That's not fake news. That's sworn testimony backed up by documents. And that testimony has blown a massive hole in Trump's reputation, his political brand, and potentially his freedom. The consequences of that testimony are going to reverberate for years in courtrooms, in Congress, in elections, and in the historical judgment of Trump's presidency. Because no matter what happens from here, Trump will forever be the president whose own CFO testified that he committed fraud. That's his legacy now. All right, that's it for today. This is developing incredibly fast, so make sure you stay tuned. Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. Does Weisselberg's testimony change your view of Trump? Do you think charges are coming? Let's discuss. See you in the next one.